Picture this. September 12, 1683. The thunder of 20,000 horses shakes the earth as winged warriors charge down from the hills. Their leader, a Polish king, is about to deliver the most devastating blow in European history. In one single moment, he would shatter an empire that had terrorized Europe for centuries. But how did one man's decision change the course of civilization forever? And what mysterious force drove him to risk everything for a city that wasn't even his own? Today, we uncover the epic tale of how Poland's king destroyed the Ottoman Empire and saved Europe at the Battle of Vienna. Historical context and setting. To understand the magnitude of what happened on that September morning, we need to travel back to a time when Europe was on the brink of collapse. The year was 1683, and the Ottoman Empire was at the height of its power. This wasn't just any military campaign. This was the culmination of centuries of Ottoman expansion that had already swallowed the Byzantine Empire, conquered the Balkans, and was now knocking on the very heart of Christian Europe. The target was Vienna, the crown jewel of the Habsburg Empire. But Vienna wasn't just another city. It was the gateway to Europe. If Vienna fell, the path would be clear for Ottoman forces to sweep across Germany, France, and beyond. The very survival of Christian civilization hung in the balance. The Ottoman war machine that descended upon Vienna was unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Contemporary accounts speak of an army so vast it stretched beyond the horizon, somewhere between 150,000 to 300,000 warriors. At its head was the Grand Vizier Karam Mustafa Pasha, a man so confident in victory that he had already prepared his victory feast. But what made this force so terrifying? It wasn't just the numbers. The Ottoman army was a sophisticated military machine that had perfected the art of siege warfare. They brought massive cannons that could pulverize stone walls, expert engineers who could tunnel beneath fortifications, and the legendary janissaries, elite soldiers who had never known defeat. The siege begins. Vienna under fire as spring turned to summer in 1683. The people of Vienna watched in horror as this massive army surrounded their city like a tightening noose. The sight must have been absolutely terrifying. Imagine standing on the city walls and seeing an endless sea of colorful tents stretching to every horizon, the glint of countless weapons in the sunlight, and the smoke from hundreds of cooking fires creating an ominous haze. Emperor Leopold had already fled the city, a decision that sent shockwaves through Europe. Was this the end? Had the Habsburg dynasty already accepted defeat? The defense of Vienna was left to Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, a seasoned warrior who found himself commanding just 15,000 soldiers and 5,000 civilian volunteers against an ocean of enemies. The siege that followed was nothing short of hellish. Day after day, Ottoman cannons pounded the ancient walls of Vienna. The thunderous bombardment never stopped. It became the soundtrack of terror for the trapped citizens. But the Ottomans weren't just relying on brute force. Their engineers, some of the best in the world, began digging tunnels beneath the city walls. They packed these tunnels with explosives, creating underground bombs that would collapse entire sections of fortifications. Inside the city, conditions became desperate beyond imagination. Food ran out. Clean water became scarce. Disease spread through the crowded streets like wildfire. Yet, incredibly, the people of Vienna didn't surrender. Women and children joined the defenders on the walls, carrying ammunition, caring for the wounded, and even fighting when the walls were breached. Every single person became a soldier in this ultimate battle for survival. But here's what's truly remarkable about Karam Mustafa's strategy. He deliberately chose not to launch an all-out assault. Why? Because he was absolutely certain that Vienna would eventually collapse from within. He believed that hunger, disease, and despair would do his work for him. It was a calculated gamble that would prove to be his greatest mistake. The call for help, forging the Holy League while Vienna burned and bled. Desperate messengers were racing across Europe carrying pleas for help. These weren't ordinary diplomatic messages. These were quite literally messages to save civilization. One man understood this better than anyone else. Pope Innocent. He declared this struggle nothing less than a holy war and called upon every Christian nation to unite against what he saw as a mortal threat to their faith and way of life. The response was extraordinary. From across Central Europe, rulers began to put aside their differences and petty rivalries. Bavaria sent troops. Saxony mobilized its forces. Various German states contributed soldiers and supplies. It was as if all of Christian Europe suddenly realized they were facing an existential threat that transcended national boundaries. But the most crucial response came from an unexpected source. King John III Sobieski of Poland. Now, here's where our story takes a fascinating turn. Poland had its own problems. The country was dealing with internal conflicts and threats from multiple directions. So why would a Polish king risk his army and his kingdom to save an Austrian city? The answer reveals something profound about Sobieski's character and strategic vision. He understood that this wasn't just about Vienna. This was about the future of Europe itself. In his own words, he declared that saving Vienna means saving Poland. He recognized that if the Ottomans succeeded here, Poland would inevitably be their next target. But there was something else driving Sobieski, something that would prove to be the Ottoman Empire's undoing. Intelligence reports were reaching him about the true state of the Ottoman army. Despite their overwhelming numbers, the siege had been dragging on for months. The Ottoman forces were becoming spread thin, their supply lines were stretched, and morale was beginning to crack. Sobieski saw an opportunity that no one else recognized. The Gathering Storm. Alliance formation by late August 1683. Something unprecedented was happening in the hills around Vienna. The Holy League, as it came to be known, was assembling the largest relief force Europe had seen in generations. Around 70,000 soldiers from different nations, speaking different languages, following different military traditions, were somehow managing to coordinate for a single, desperate mission. At the center of this alliance was King John III Sobieski himself. This wasn't just a military commander. This was a warrior king who had spent his entire life fighting for his country's survival. Sobieski had faced down Swedish invasions, Russian incursions, and Ottoman raids. He understood warfare not just as a theoretical exercise, but as a brutal reality where split-second decisions meant the difference between victory and annihilation. But perhaps most importantly, Sobieski commanded the most feared cavalry force in Europe, the Polish Winged Hussars. These weren't ordinary horsemen. They were an elite formation that had evolved over generations of warfare into something truly unique. Their distinctive wings, attached to their backs or their horses, created a psychological weapon as much as a tactical one. The sight and sound of these winged warriors charging across a battlefield was said to terrify even the most experienced enemies. As September arrived, the moment of truth was approaching. Inside Vienna, the situation had become critical. The city walls had been breached in multiple places. Ottoman forces had established footholds inside the city itself. Count Starhemberg was preparing for a final desperate defense when scouts brought incredible news. A massive relief army was approaching from the north. The epic battle, September 12, 1683. Dawn broke on September 12, 1683, and with it came one of the most decisive battles in human history. From the hills overlooking Vienna, King Sobieski could see the entire tactical situation spread out below him like a living map. The Ottoman camp stretched for miles in every direction. But their forces were dispersed and focused on the siege rather than defending against an external attack. The battle began with coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Austrian, Bavarian, and Saxon forces struck the Ottoman flanks, while Polish infantry engaged their front lines. The fighting was brutal and immediate. Ottoman janissaries, those elite soldiers who had conquered half of Europe, fought back with the desperation of men who knew that defeat here meant the end of their empire's expansion. For hours, the battle raged across the rolling countryside around Vienna. Cannons thundered, muskets cracked, and men fought hand-to-hand with swords and pikes. The Ottoman forces, despite being caught off guard, were demonstrating exactly why they had been feared for so long. Their Sipahi cavalry launched fierce counterattacks, while Tatar allies harassed the Christian flanks with their traditional hit-and-run tactics. But King Sobieski was waiting for the perfect moment. He had positioned his most devastating weapon, 20,000 Polish cavalry, including the legendary Winged Hussars, on the high ground, ready to deliver what he hoped would be the killing blow. The charge that shook the world, and then it happened. At approximately 4 p.m. on September 12, 1683, King John III Sobieski personally led the largest cavalry charge in European history. Picture this moment: 20,000 horsemen with the king himself at their head, thundering down from the hills toward the Ottoman camp. The ground literally shook beneath their hooves. The sound was like an earthquake mixed with thunder. At the center of this avalanche of men and horses were the Winged Hussars, their distinctive feathered wings creating an otherworldly spectacle. Contemporary accounts describe the charge as something supernatural, as if warrior angels were descending from heaven itself. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Ottoman forces, who had been successfully holding their ground against the infantry attacks, suddenly found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. This wasn't just a cavalry charge. This was a carefully coordinated assault by the most experienced and best-equipped horsemen in Europe, led by a king who was risking everything on a single, desperate gamble. The impact was catastrophic for the Ottoman forces. Their carefully organized battle lines dissolved in minutes. Panic spread through their ranks faster than wildfire. Grand Vizier Karam Mustafa Pasha, the man who had been so confident of victory just hours before, watched in horror as centuries of Ottoman military tradition crumbled before his eyes. Within an hour, the entire Ottoman army was in full retreat. They abandoned their camp, their cannons, their supplies, and their siege equipment. The army that had terrorized Europe for months was running for their lives, leaving behind a treasure trove of military equipment that would take days to catalog. The mysterious turn of fate. But here's where our story takes a mysterious turn that historians still debate today. How did King Sobieski know exactly when to strike? Some accounts suggest he had received intelligence about Ottoman troop movements that gave him the perfect timing. Others believe it was simply the intuition of a brilliant military commander who recognized opportunity when he saw it. But there's another theory, one that's more intriguing and controversial. Some historians suggest that Sobieski had been in secret communication with elements within the Ottoman army itself, perhaps discontented commanders who were growing tired of Karam Mustafa's leadership, or supply officers who could provide information about the army's true condition. This theory is supported by the fact that the Ottoman retreat was so complete and so immediate. Experienced military forces don't usually collapse so quickly unless there are internal problems that aren't immediately visible to outside observers. Could it be that the Battle of Vienna was won not just on the battlefield, but through intelligence? Operations that we're only now beginning to understand. The mystery deepens when we consider what happened to Grand Vizier Karam Mustafa Pasha after the battle. Within months, he was executed by order of Sultan Mehmed IV, not just for losing the battle, but allegedly for corruption and military incompetence. But was there more to the story? Had Mustafa's failure been so complete because he was fighting enemies both outside and inside his own army? The ripple effects. How one battle changed history, the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Vienna, was clear enough. The Ottoman threat to Central Europe was ended forever. But the long-term consequences were far more profound and mysterious than anyone could have predicted at the time. First, the victory of Vienna sparked a series of Christian counteroffensives that would roll back Ottoman power throughout the Balkans. The psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in generations, European armies were advancing into Ottoman territory rather than desperately defending their own lands. But here's what's truly fascinating. The victory also marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in European thinking about warfare, diplomacy, and international cooperation. The Holy League that had formed to save Vienna became a template for future European alliances. The idea that different nations could put aside their differences to face a common threat would eventually evolve into the complex system of international relations that defines Europe today. King John III Sobieski returned to Poland as a hero, but his victory came with unexpected consequences. The massive resources he had expended saving Vienna left Poland temporarily weakened, contributing to the country's eventual decline in the following century. It's one of history's great ironies. The king who saved Europe may have inadvertently contributed to his own kingdom's future struggles. The legend lives on today, more than 3 centuries later. The Battle of Vienna continues to captivate historians and military enthusiasts around the world. But perhaps what's most remarkable is how this single day's events continue to influence our world in ways both obvious and subtle. The victory at Vienna didn't just save Europe from Ottoman conquest, it preserved a particular vision of European civilization that valued religious diversity, intellectual freedom, and political independence. Without Sobieski's charge, the Enlightenment might never have happened. The scientific revolution could have been stillborn. The very foundations of modern Western civilization hung in the balance on that September morning in 1683. But here's the ultimate mystery that continues to fascinate us. What drove King John III Sobieski to risk everything for a city and people that weren't his own? Was it pure strategic calculation? Religious conviction? A warrior's instinct for the decisive moment? Or was it something deeper? A recognition that some moments in history require individuals to rise above their personal interests and fight for something larger than themselves? Conclusion. The legacy of heroes, the Battle of Vienna, stands as one of history's greatest reminders that individual courage and decisive leadership can change the course of civilizations. King John III Sobieski and his Polish Winged Hussars didn't just win a battle. They preserved a way of life, protected centuries of cultural development, and ensured that Europe would continue to be a continent of diverse nations rather than a single empire. But their story also reminds us that history's most crucial moments often depend on people making incredibly difficult choices with incomplete information under enormous pressure. Sobieski had no guarantee that his desperate charge would succeed. He could have easily led his army to destruction and left both Poland and Austria vulnerable to conquest. Instead, he chose to risk everything on a single moment of glory. And in doing so, he saved a civilization today. As we face our own challenges and uncertainties, the story of Vienna reminds us that sometimes the most important battles are won not by the largest armies or the most advanced weapons, but by individuals who have the courage to act when action is needed most. What do you think drove King Sobieski to make his legendary charge? Was it destiny, calculation, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of courage and consequence inspired you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to History in Motion for more incredible tales from our past that continue to shape our world today. Remember, Understanding history isn't just about learning what happened. It's about understanding how the choices made by people long ago continue to influence our lives today. And sometimes, those choices remind us that ordinary people really can change the world when they have the courage to act at the right moment. Until next time, keep exploring the mysteries of history that make us who we are.